The Allen Lund Company wishes the owner-operators driving across this great country happy holidays.
Hello and welcome to Trucking with OOIDA. I'm Scott Thompson.
And I'm Ashley Blackford.
So Ashley, I was thinking today about how we come up with the people that we reach out to, who we want to speak to on the show. There are some logical pathways that we sometimes follow,
Ones that obviously make sense.
Yeah, if there's something in the news like non-domiciled CDLs or truck parking or whatever, it makes sense that we reach out to that particular person to talk to them about that particular thing. Today's show is a little bit different because we're talking about a topic that really has no direct correlation to trucking. Well, trucks haul this thing.
Yeah.
I don't know why we're beating around the bush.
And truck drivers, obviously, I would think, enjoy this
Yes,
thing.
this is not a riddle show, by the way. We are going to tell you what we're going to talk about. So we'll get into this here when we talk with Alan Richer, also known as the Toga Chip Guy. And he'll explain that. Not computer chips, we're talking potato chips here. And this started because of a conversation we were having recently with Joanne Couture,
Yes.
OOIDA board member, Canadian member,
Yes.
came in bringing you a bunch of treats.
She brought me a bunch of treats. She brought me Kraft Dinner, which is mac and cheese. She brought me Shreddies, my favorite kind of cereal that you can only get in Canada. And she brought me all-dressed chips, which are my favorite. And then she also brought ketchup chips.
And she brought some chocolate as well.
Yes.
But the idea here was we were talking about just kind of the differences between Canada and the U.S. with regard to snacks and chips and all this kind of thing. And that got you, I think, mostly thinking.
Got the wheels turning. I was like, you know what? There's got to be like a chip expert or like somebody who's really dove into the history. And I found him.
You did. Alan Richer definitely qualifies for someone who has really dived into an issue, and it, I wouldn't say consumes him, but you're going to.
Yeah.
You're going to hear it here. This man knows more about potato chips than I know about literally anything.
Yeah. No, he definitely has quite a history.
Yeah.
He was one of the first people who popped up when I just went into Google. I wrote him on LinkedIn. He got back to me and he's done a ton of media.
Yes, he has.
Big names like the History Channel. I know he's done I don't know if it was Australia's version of 60 Minutes or 66 Minutes or something like that.
66 Minutes?
It was something different.
Because
maybe the time.
Like the toilet, the water swirls in the opposite direction. They have an extra 6 minutes.
I don't know.
Is that right?
We'll have to find an expert on that as well.
All right. Well, that's our next thing. So, Alan Richer's been on 66 Minutes,
I don't know.
Australia.
I'll have to double check.
And on a whole other host of shows and podcasts and what have you. And now he's on Trucking with OOIDA.
What sparked our interest in talking about chips, I believe I said it in my message to you, we had board meetings a couple weeks ago, and we have a Canadian board member. I'm also Canadian. And Scott and I got talking about the difference of chips on both sides of the border. She brought over some all-dressed, which are my favorite, that I know the U.S. does have, but then she also brought ketchup. And you and I just got into quite a discussion about chips, and I was like, I wonder if there's like a chip expert out there.
And there is.
And welcome, Alan.
Yeah.
Thanks for talking to us.
Well, I'm happy to do it.
I'm curious, your name, you go by the Toga Chip Guy, right?
That's correct. And what happened was I when I did my first presentation, probably about 12 years ago, I was a senior tax counsel at General Electric at the time, but I started getting into this. And one of the local newspaper people here, Mark McGuire, not related to the baseball player who played in St. Louis, he coined the phrase because initially what happened was the first generic name for all potato chips was called the Saratoga Chip. So he just Toga is a shortened version of Saratoga, and then Chip Guy is sort of self-explanatory.
Do you get a lot of people who are confused and think that you're you wear a toga, or is there? I'm sure you get some of that.
No, I always thought that a great name for a yoga studio in Saratoga would be Toga Yoga, but I've never gotten
That might exist, I wonder.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it does.
It doesn't? Well, hey.
Maybe that's your
Maybe
next,
that's your next
venture.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fun. Let's walk through this, Alan, because this is a very specific expertise and a very specific, I don't know, is hobby the right word, I suppose? How did you kind of start down this path to becoming the chip guy, the potato chip expert?
So in 2004, I lived just outside of Albany, New York, the capital of New York State. And in 2004, my wife and I bought a home in Saratoga Springs, New York, which is about 35 minutes away. And I was trying, we live on Saratoga Lake, and we were trying to find some artwork. And when I went around, I actually met somebody who told me the story, the legend that the potato chip was purportedly invented on Saratoga Lake in a place called Moon's Lake House. And there's a lot of myth and folklore about this, and there's a few different stories. I'll give you, if you want, I could tell you the two or three ones that are most
Please.
common.
Yeah, please do, yeah.
So there was this family, and there was a gentleman who had a sister, and actually had two sisters. His name was George Speck Crum. His formal name was Speck, but people called him Crum without a B, C-R-U-M. And they say that he never complained because a crumb was bigger than a speck. And he had a sister who went by Aunt Katie, and she had a lot of different names, but her last name was Weeks. And she also had another sister whose brother was somewhat of a famous chef, and there was a hotel restaurant near Saratoga Springs in the next town called Boston Spa. So there's three different versions, and there's a lot more, but I'll give you the three big ones. So the first version is that George Crum, who was very well known as a hunter and could cook anything, and had worked in different restaurants, but then had his own. He went to work for a place called Moon's Lake House, which was on Saratoga Lake, and people would bring all kinds of exotic animals to have him cook because he liked the challenge. And so legend has it that Commodore Vanderbilt, the head of the Vanderbilt family that made their fortune in the railroads and that, came to Saratoga Springs and dined there, and he ordered steak and French fries. And not once, but twice, the Commodore complained that the French fries were too thick and not well done enough. And George was quite an honorary person, and so what happened was he got upset, so he took out his razor. He took the razor, cut the potatoes razor thin, put them in lard, deep fried them, and poured a ton of salt on them, thinking that he would upset the customer, that he wouldn't like them. And to his surprise, the customer liked them. So that's called the disgruntled customer story. And that's the one that's most popular. But, as I used to say, that don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Right. Yeah.
And so the next thing was that at one point his sister Katie was working together with him, and she accidentally dropped a potato into a donut, or they called it a cruller machine. And it got deep fried. They cut it open, and they said, "Oh, these are really good. We'll have more of them." So it was an accident. And then the third story is that George and his sister and their brother-in-law were working at this hotel restaurant in the next town, and that they experimented with a lot of different recipes, and it was more of an evolution than a revolution, so that they had worked on it. And then when George got hired to go to Moon's Lake House, he debuted it there when he became the head chef there. And there's a lot of other versions, but those are the three most common.
Do we know which one is the most likely to be true?
Well, I think the bottom line in terms of the truth is that none of them are true.
Okay.
Because what happened is there was a Dr. Kitchener in London. And so what happened is the Saratoga story all dates around 1853. But in 1816, which was a number of years before then, obviously, this Dr. Kitchener put out a book called The Cook's Oracle. It was sort of a recipe book. And he had a recipe for potato shavings, which were essentially potato chips. So the bottom line is nobody knows where or when this chip was invented. And it's possible that more than one person independently invented it without the other people knowing that it had already been invented somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, is this a situation? So it sounds like you moved to Saratoga Springs. You caught wind of the history there and the stories and the folklore and all of that, and that kind of got you hooked. Is that what kind of got you down this path here?
Yeah, I met a man who had worked for a very famous photographer. You have to remember, at one point in time, Saratoga Springs had the two largest hotels in the world, and back in the 1800s, America was sort of a Puritan society, and you weren't supposed to take vacations. They were frowned upon. So what a lot of these wealthy people did is they went to their doctors, and they gave them prescriptions to go to Saratoga Springs, which had a lot of different water springs. And so they would go there, they would walk, and they would drink the water, and that was their excuse for getting away. And because of the fact that it was so popular, the two biggest hotels and all these wealthy people there, it was really the first place that all the paparazzi came.
Oh.
So there was a lot of photographs. And one of the people who was worked for as an assistant for one of the famous photographers had gathered a lot of these pictures. And when I met him, he told me all the story, and he had some medical issues, and he had all these original photographs. And so I ended up buying them from him, and that's how it started.
Wow. But now, looking back on your resume on LinkedIn, you went to law school, right?
Yes, I went to Syracuse University, undergrad and law school.
And kind of worked in that field for quite a while, right?
Yeah, for like 35 years as a tax lawyer.
Wow. Did you ever think my future is in chips?
Not computer chips.
Maybe I had worked for a computer company.
Ah, there it is.
Chips, but never in potato chips.
At Truck Stop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truck Stop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
What was this? This fascinates me for a number of reasons. One being, you start out and you're it sounds like you've got this interest in potato chips, and again, kind of the history and the stories surrounding it. And, we'll get into kind of how the potato chip has maybe changed or developed over the years. But at some point, we will go online and look on Wikipedia if something, kind of piques our interests and do a little research, and then we kind of, leave it there and move on to the next thing. Something about this hooked you. I would assume that you liked potato chips before this even became a thing for you. But what I guess, again, propelled you down the path to just like, I'm so focused on this, I find this interesting, I'm going to follow the history and kind of become the expert on this? Because that is, in some ways, a decision, but in other ways, I assume it just kind of took off for you. How did that all kind of play out?
Well, I have a curiosity, and what happened was I was sort of curious by the fact that the first generic name of all potato chips were the Saratoga Chip.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother always told me everything in moderation, but I never really paid attention. So I started doing research to find out find out everything I could about it. And what's interesting is that while people had written up stories about Saratoga, they never had really looked at the whole global thing and how it expanded and how the name was used everywhere. And so I started doing that and sort of realized that I was doing a pioneer on things that nobody had ever done. I thought that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because I had been a tax lawyer. And when you're a tax lawyer, what happens is you come up with very novel things that you don't want to get out in the public because the IRS figures some of this stuff out and they'll shut it down. So you're basically like the rabbi who on the holiest day of the year plays hooky and goes out and plays golf and he gets a hole-in-one, but because he wasn't supposed to be there, he can't tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
And then when you're doing this with the potato chip, it's like the greatest conversation starter. Everybody in the world, first of all, they all laugh because they think it's the biggest joke ever. But then when you bring out your business card and you show them, they think, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And you have a website, but you also have a museum, right?
Well, I have a website. I have the largest collection of memorabilia, and what I do is I do a couple of different things. So I do museum exhibits, and then I also speak. So the biggest conference I ever did was for the AARP down in Florida at Orlando at SeaWorld. I always said that Flipper really enjoyed the show. but anyway, when I do that, I have all my materials on a PowerPoint thing, and I start out with the history, and then I show a lot of my memorabilia, and it's all done in a timeline, so it's chronological order. And when I got this AARP gig, they gave me 2 hours to speak, which is a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, what could I do to hold their attention? So I created like a 200-question potato chip trivia.
Okay.
So that was one of the things that kept them awake.
Give us.
But I use my law school practice, which was it's interactive. They just call on you. You don't wait for people to raise your hands. You call on people randomly.
Right.
So it's interactive. Hopefully, it's entertaining and it's educational. And I dispense a lot of humor, and it's a stream of consciousness. Even when I write my blog, sometimes it might be a name, and then I'll think about all these things that related to my names. So to give you an example, my father and I, we didn't necessarily at the time that he was alive have the same musical taste, but the one artist that sort of we both agreed on was great was Neil Diamond. And so he had, his famous song, Sweet Caroline, and everybody sings in the chorus, so good, so good. And so there was a company out in St. Louis, So Good Potato Chips. So when I started writing about that, I reminisced about that story about So Good, and my father and I both liking Neil Diamond, and I built the whole blog post around that.
Oh.
Yeah, it sounds fun. So you mentioned the trivia, and did you say you had 200 questions on the trivia thing? Did I hear that right?
That's right.
That's a lot of questions. Don't give us all 200, please. But do you have a couple on there that you have maybe just off the top of your head that might be interesting for people? Because I think those are questions that probably lead us down a path of learning more about things too, right? Which is the idea.
Right, and some of them are very hard. So, but I'll give you a couple of them, okay?
Yeah.
So, let's see. So my very first question I ever came up with was, what does the potato chip have in common with the Wizard of Oz?
Oh.
Ooh. I want to say like the year, same time it came out.
I would have no idea. That's better guess than I've got. What is it, Alan?
I'll give you a hint.
Yeah.
It has to do with a character.
Okay.
Character.
Or the person who played one of the characters in the Wizard of Oz.
Oh, okay. So we're probably talking Dorothy. We're talking, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank now.
I wouldn't know their actual names.
Help us out, Alan.
Okay, well, the answer is Bert Lahr, who played the Cowardly Lion.
Okay.
He was the very first pitch person for Lay's famous Bet You Can't Eat Just One campaign.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's interesting.
That's a good one. What else you got?
Well, what popular song, and this goes back, I'll give you a hint, it was famous by Sinatra, but includes potato chips in its lyrics.
Oh my goodness. Not My Way. I'm trying to go through the Sinatra catalog.
It's not one of his real famous songs, but it's a very famous song.
Okay. I think you stumped us again.
Okay, so it was How About You? So it goes, I like New York in June. How about you?
Okay.
I like a Gershwin tune. How about you? And it says, I like a fireside when the storm is due. I like potato chips, moonlight, and motor trips. How about you?
There it is. So the thing that strikes me when you're talking about this and the trivia questions is that there is a place in American history for the potato chip because it has been around for a while. And as you said earlier, I think most everybody likes them or some variation of them. Is this a uniquely American invention? And I know you mentioned there was, talk of 1816, I think, and in the UK, the potato chip maybe being invented there. But it seems to me that the U.S. is where it really kind of took off. And from there, is that the springboard to going to other countries and being introduced there? Is that
yes? It
is that right?
basically it became popularized, even though it might not have been invented in Saratoga Springs. It definitely became popularized there because of the fact that all the chips were named Saratoga chips. But just to give you a couple of examples, you mentioned the history. So what happened is the oldest established company, which just a couple years ago was sold. It was called Mike Sells, and it was in Dayton, Ohio. And D.W. Mike Sell, he started selling chips that he would make in his house, and he would deliver them by his bicycle. And so since he was in Dayton, Ohio, when his bicycle broke, where do you think he took it to fix it?
Took it to the factory?
Have any idea who owned the bike shop in Dayton, Ohio?
Oh, the Wright brothers.
The Wright brothers.
Yeah.
So he took it to the Wright brothers. Yep. So that's sort of an interesting thing. And another interesting thing is Saratoga Springs had a lot of illegal casinos that were run by Meyer Lansky and all of the people, that were in the mob. And they were all in upstate New York before Las Vegas. And one of their buddies from out in Illinois came to visit them. And his name was Alphonse Capone.
Mm-hmm.
And he discovered potato chips. And so he went back to Chicago, and he had these people named Eugenia and Leonard Japp, J-A-P-P. And they basically supplied all of his illegal speakeasies with candies and nuts. And so he called them up, and he said, we're going into the Saratoga chip business. So I wrote a blog about that. It was called An Offer They Couldn't Refuse.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because later on, during World War II, it wasn't very good to have a name called Japp, J-A-P-P, so they changed it to J's. So they talk about whenever the Teamsters or whatever had strikes, and that the one company that never had a strike was J's, because it was somewhat controlled by Mr. Capone.
Yeah. And that would have been obviously in the early days of his operation there. So at that point, potato chips or Saratoga chips or Toga Chip, they were not. It doesn't sound like they were kind of a widespread household thing. If he hadn't really known about them, right?
No, what happened was a lot of them were made in a home, by people, and they were distributed locally. So, for example, Grandma Moses, the famous artist, what happened is that before she moved to upstate New York, and they have a museum for her nearby Vermont, she lived in North Carolina, and she supported her family by making Saratoga chips.
Interesting. When did it take off, where every store has it? And you've got entire aisles in the grocery store now devoted to chips. Obviously, it wasn't always like that. When did it sort of become a household item?
Well, what happened was there was no national company. So Herman Lay bought a company that was based in Chamblee outside of Atlanta in Georgia. And then later on, he merged with Frito-Lay, which was started by Charles Doolin. And that was the first national company that they had. And that's when, you could get this, they could distribute it all over the lot.
Interesting. Yeah.
How have chips changed over the years? I know, looking on your website, I think the photo that comes up on the homepage, they used to come in like a tin.
Well, originally they came in barrels, and that's where you always got the expression "the bottom of the barrel," because one of the problems with chips is that they had a limited shelf life and they would get rancid. So if it was sitting on the bottom of the barrel, it probably wasn't very good. But then what happened was, what happened is, you have to remember that supermarkets were a lot different than they are today. So they were sort of like a drugstore when you go into the pharmacy. So you had the counter, and everything was behind the counter, and the clerk would get you whatever you needed. You didn't go down aisles. And so they had, sometimes they had barrels, and then they had these other things like sometimes big glass containers that the chips were in, or they had these display cases, which I have a lot of them, and you would have a big scoop, and you would take them and you would put them in a bag or something, and they'd weigh them, and you take them home.
Interesting.
And it was interesting what, like, a couple of the big inventions that are still very prevalent in potato chips were created both by Herman Lay and Charles Doolin, who started Frito-Lay. And one of the things were, you know what the end cap is in the supermarket?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
So what happened was when Herman Lay was buying up all these companies, he would really he realized that if you went in and you displayed these things on an end cap instead of somewhere else, you would get a much higher volume of purchases. So he created the end cap.
Marketing.
And another thing was, as I said, they used to have like these different jars and stuff. And so what would happen was when people would put the scoop in the jar, it would sort of jingle, so they couldn't make sure that nobody was stealing anything. But then what happened was Charles Doolin, he created what's known as impulse shopping. You know how when you go to the supermarket today and you see the candy near the cashier?
Yes.
I'm familiar with that problem, yes.
Well, he created the chip clip where they would have the potato chips all displayed right by the cash register, so people who were going in for other things would see them and buy them without having gone into the store, intending to buy them in the first place.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
Truckers, your engine works as hard as you do. Don't let torsional vibrations sideline your rig. Vibrotech TVD viscous dampers protect your crankshaft, cut downtime, and keep you earning mile after mile. Over 75 years of trusted protection made in the USA. Find a dealer at vibrotechtvd.com.
So Mr. Lay, and we know his name obviously because it's on bags of chips everywhere still. Sounds like he was the first one to realize that this is a money-making venture that he could kind of, jump into.
Yeah. Now, what happened is what happened was he merged with Frito-Lay, and then he sold the company to Pepsi. And
Right.
Pepsi, he became the biggest shareholder in Pepsi and became chairman of the board of Pepsi.
Gotcha. So this was, what year roughly was this where it started to become, an item that you would see in every supermarket? Was this
it probably really got everywhere like by 1960, but it started before that.
And I imagine those early chips were just like basic plain potato chips, right? I mean, flavors probably weren't part of the equation back then.
Right. I mean, there were, basically there's three major ingredients. There's the potato, there's an oil, and there's salt. Now, they vary in terms of what kind of potatoes they use, what kind of salt they use, and what kind of oil. So today, people are using more healthy things like avocado oil. They've gone away from things like lard and that. And but the Irish, there was a company over in Ireland that came up with, some of the original flavors.
Oh, is that right? So they were the first company to kind of realize, hey, we can do something a little bit different with this.
Right. And then later on, people came up with barbecue and
sour cream and
flavors.
onion and all those things.
Right. And it's interesting how things have changed, because years ago when you went into the supermarket, you could only buy plain chips, but they would have different like spices that you could then sprinkle on your chips. And that's how you could make them. But now you see all the chips come, pre-made like that.
Yeah. Talk to us about the flavors. Like, when did that ramp up? And I mean,
The
nowadays
explosion,
it's like
everywhere.
I mean, there's every kind of flavor under the sun.
Yeah.
Well, Lay's, just to put it in perspective, they have like probably 70% or more of the global market. And so they have these competitions every year where in each country people recommend different flavors that they should make. And, like in Japan and Korea and all over the world. And so they pick 2 or 3 each year from each country. And then what's happening is they're proliferating, and people are, getting them in the U.S. or trying some things that might come up with seaweed or something in Japan.
Yep.
And when your original question, about ketchup, ketchup was always very popular in Canada. It was I don't think it came into about 1970. There was a company called Hostess that originally introduced it. But for whatever reason, whenever they tried to market in the U.S., there was never much demand. It's somewhat cultural. But there's a regional company out of Pennsylvania called Herr's, Herr apostrophe S, and they're one of the companies that do market a ketchup flavored chip.
Alan,
you name it, there's probably those flavored chips now.
Alan, you just made my day. I didn't realize that we did actually still sell ketchup-flavored chips in the United States. I'm going to go on the search after this.
If you go to the Herr's website, you'll find them.
I'm writing that down right now.
That's something I always have to get my family to bring over.
Yeah, they don't have it here. You mentioned Korea.
And all those companies have websites, so even if you're not close to where they're located, you can order online.
Yeah.
You mentioned Korea. I lived in Korea for a while, and there was a rage when these honey butter chips came out. It must have been like 2013 or 2014, and everybody was trying to buy them. And it was like, you couldn't find them anywhere because there was a thing, and they've got, octopus flavored chips and shrimp flavored, lots of flavor. That was my first experience kind of seeing these off the wall flavors that, are out there that you don't really see here in the United States or in Canada, I would assume as well. But you're seeing those now. What are some of the weirder chip flavors or, weirder chip, I guess maybe not weird is not the right word, but just less common or
surprising.
Things that have kind of made you raise your eyebrows.
There's so many. There's a company that started, it was called Atomic Chips. It was somewhere out, I think it might have been Utah, I'm not sure. And, they a lot of times what happens is people send me chips. I'm not necessarily promoting anybody's chips, but they want me to either review them or at least make.
Is this the one chip challenge thing where it's like a really spicy chip?
No, what happened is he sent me like 40 different varieties. Some of them were okay, and others were like so weird I couldn't even eat them. It all becomes on your personal preference and what you taste, what you like.
So you do eat a lot of chips then. It's not like you're just doing the history. You're also eating
And you're getting sent chips.
Yeah.
I went to my doctor recently, and he said, "Well, you have a lot of salt." And I said, "What a surprise! The Toga Chip Guy has salt."
There's a reason for that, for sure.
Yeah. I am curious, as someone who yourself has tried a lot of chips, what is your favorite flavor of chips?
That's one of the two most common questions I get. The answer is the Cape Cod 40% less fat.
Ah.
Just the
now. I'll give you a little trivia question. Who owns Cape Cod potato chips?
It's not me or Ashley. I can tell you that. Tell us.
Campbell's Soup.
Oh, okay.
I did not know that.
All right.
You said that's one of the two most popular questions. What's the other question you get?
There was a company called the Charles Chips that used to have this home delivery thing, and what would happen is that you could get tins of both potato chips, pretzels, different types of popcorn, chocolate chip cookies, and it was very successful for a while. And the tins were basically loaned to you, and it ended up not being sustainable because the aluminum became very expensive, and then whenever they had to recycle them, they had to clean them out, and they had to transportation bringing them back empty. So it didn't work out. So that died, but you can still get them in certain, like the Fresh Market or the Vermont Country Store and some other places. It's not the same people who were making them. Originally, it was a company called Musser's, Musser', that was down in Pennsylvania that marketed it that way. And by coincidence, in the town I grew up in New Jersey, the people who I knew had a big distributor, and then they moved out to L.A. and brought it out there, and it was doing really well. And then, as I said, the whole structure sort of fell apart. It became non-economical.
Is the question that you get related to that? Or
Yeah, because everybody remembers. There's a lot of
I
nostalgia
see.
Okay.
They're
in
trying
terms of people remembering. Before long, people were paying like the amount of a mortgage for all this stuff, and they kept ordering more and more, and didn't realize how expensive it was getting. Sort of like your cable bill creeps up.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like an addiction. You mentioned, I think earlier, that you are married. What does your wife
I wondered that
think
as
about
well.
all of this? Is she on board?
Well, basically, she made me get a huge storage room.
Yeah.
She was tired of looking at
because
chips.
I had to declutter the house.
Yeah.
It was either get rid of a lot of my stuff or I would have to leave.
Yeah. I can
I could see
But
that.
understand.
she's pretty flexible, but everybody has their limits.
Yes, that's for
But
sure.
I can tell you she's great, because what happened was I did this museum exhibit a couple years ago, and what happened is somebody came up and they, from far away, a few hours away, past Cooperstown, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is, and they said, well, there's going to be this country auction, and one of the items on there is a wooden crate from one of the very first potato chip companies going back to the 1800s. And I was going to be out of town. So my wife went out there early in the morning. She had to leave like at 4 o'clock in the morning to get there when it opened. And she bought it for me.
Oh,
Aw,
that's sweet.
that is sweet.
That's
It's
a nice
interesting,
surprise.
too, because when I started out, and I can tell you a couple of stories. So when I started out, everybody, and I would call up and I would say I was a potato chip historian, and they'd all laugh and like hang up
Yeah.
the phone and everything. It was
Yeah.
a big joke. Now I get calls from all over the world, because people will be cleaning out their grandmother's attic or something, and they're finding this stuff, and they call me up and they say, well, what is this worth? And so what actually happens most of the time is I'll look at it, I'll give them an idea, and I'll tell them, it's probably worth more to me than it is to anybody else. And if you ever consider selling it, let me know what you think is a fair price.
And that's how you
So
get a
I
lot
had
of your
seen
stuff.
this thing.
Yeah.
I had seen this one thing where this guy who was a famous chef in Knoxville, Tennessee, and his grandmother lived on the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and this old potato chip mandolin cutter had actually washed up on the shore and had all it was really excellent condition. So he wrote an article about it, and I found it when I was doing some web research. And so we talked about it, and I said to him, well, the same thing I just told you, have you ever thought about selling it? And he said, well, I never really have thought about it. So I said, why don't you think about it and give me a call? And I had, to be honest with you, forgotten about it. Then he called me maybe 2 months later, and he said, I decided that I really don't need it. So I said, well, what's a fair price? Because my wife is a commercial realtor, and she always tells me never be the first one to tell the price, because the other person might offer you more.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, well, how about $100? So I thought that was really cheap. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $200 and we'll both be happy.
Wow.
So I end up buying a lot of stuff. Sometimes, people want a lot more money than it's worth. And, but that's sort of what happens is I acquire a lot of stuff that way. But the interesting thing is, we were talking about how it used to be a joke. So when I turned 65, my wife's family bought tickets for me and her to see Steve Martin and Martin Short.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was the guy who used to be the band leader for David Letterman, Paul Schaefer,
Yep.
he was accompanying them. He came into the audience and randomly picked me out to do Chevy Chase's role in The Three Amigos and do the dance with them.
Nice.
So Martin Short says to me, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a potato chip historian. So Steve Martin goes, what a coincidence. We had one of you last night. And so that whole show, like even when I went back to my seat, he kept making jokes about it all night long.
That's
Yeah.
funny.
So it was really funny. It just goes to show.
And I assume you got a picture or video of that. That's a great
I have a
interaction.
picture. What
Yeah.
happened was they made such a stink that if you had a camera, my
yeah.
wife got a picture that they would seize your phone.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
I did call to see whether or not they had anybody had taped it, and they didn't. But I'm going to see them December 4th. They're coming back to Albany, so maybe they'll do that again, and
See
maybe
if he
I'll be able to
remembers
go and
you.
do an
Yeah.
encore.
Yeah.
You mentioned your collection. I'm curious, do you have like a certain item that is really unique or that's maybe your favorite, or what would
Well,
be?
there's so many, but it's sort of interesting. What had happened was at one point in time, I called down to the Snack Food Association, which is in suburban Washington, D.C., and they told me that the person who founded the association, a man named Harvey Noss, he had died, but his son at the time was in his late 80s, and his son's name was Donald Noss. And Donald had recently lost both his wife and his daughter to cancer, and they said he was really in a bad way, but he really enjoyed talking about the potato chip, so it would be a good deed if I would call him up. So I called him up, and we hit it off really well, and we had like phone pals. We were talking all the time, and then he invited me out to suburban Cleveland, Ohio, which is where the Snack Food Association began. And every morning we would get up and we would drive like an hour and a half, and we'd go meet all these old-time, they call them chippers, people who were in the business. And what had happened was they saw me as a young kid, even because they were all like in their 80s and stuff. And it was sort of a handshake agreement. They said, well, you know, if you would perpetuate the stories of our family's business, we'll give you all this memorabilia that never saw the day, you know, the light of day. So I started writing. When I came up with my website, there's a section in there called Building an Industry where I profile a lot of the companies. And sometimes people actually hire me to do the biography of their companies, you know, even more so than I can do a better job sometimes than they can. It's sort of interesting.
Is there, you've got a lot of items, it sounds like. Is there an item that's like your white whale, the thing that you got your eye on and you're like, man, I really wish I could get my hands on that?
There's a few. There's a thing, there was a company called Fox's Potato Chips, and it's a picture. It looks like it looks like a combination of Abe Lincoln's face on a fox. And it's when the potato chips were first coming out, there was an exposition down in New York City where they were inviting grocers and hotels and other people to learn about potato chips. So that's one of the really cool things. And then I have what was always sort of the holy grail was there's this Aunt Jemima Saratoga Chip machine, potato chipper. And what happened was I had seen a catalog for antiques that mentioned it, but I could never find a picture of any of it. And then eventually I did get a picture from a different catalog. And I was talking at one of my presentations, and somebody, it was a big line of people come up afterwards to ask you questions. And somebody came up and said, well, I have one of these at home. But by the time that they came back again after the line, they had left. So I never was able to get it. So I have a picture of what it looks like, but that's like sort of the holy grail.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Fox potato chips. Do you know where those are created?
That was in New York City.
Okay.
So what happens is when you go to my website, I put up a lot of different things. I like to make up my own words. So I have a section called Chipsapes, which is recipes for chips and dips. Mm-hmm. And then I have a Building an Industry. I have Chips in the News, and that's two types. There's hard news about potato chips, and then there's anecdotal, humorous news. So you might find like a pelican flies into a convenience store and grabs a bunch of bags in its beak and flies out. And stories like that, or a beer truck collides with a potato chip truck, and there's beer and potato chips all over the road. Or, you know, even things where people try to sneak things through. And a lot of these things, you know, I'll write blogs, but the real, what I would say the crown jewel, I don't put on my website. I keep it in a PowerPoint that's not published, because once you lose control of it, you know, you don't have any, you're losing all the value that you have in terms of your presentation.
Mm-hmm. You had a light bulb moment
there,
actually.
The reason I asked about Fox potato chips, so I used to live in Maine, and it was in a silver bag, potato chips. I think they were Fox. I'm fairly certain.
Yeah, there's a company in Maine called Fox's, yes.
Yes, okay. They are like a Maine staple. They are very, very good. That was like something.
But that's not related to this company.
Yeah, that's why I asked. So
yeah, your recall with these things, Alan, is just
very
remarkable.
Impressive.
Your knowledge.
Well, people always tell me I had a good memory. So
well, you do.
Yeah, I think it
really
checks out for sure. Yeah.
So you know, since you're in the trucking industry, when I do an exhibit, I have a whole section of, you know, different delivery trucks going back from the beginning, bicycles to When they used to have horse and wagons to a lot of other things. And I sort of do it in a way where I'll have a picture, for example, of Salt Lake City in 1900. And in the distance, you can see a horse and wagon underneath where the cable cars are and that. And then when I blow it up, it'll have some kind of company's name on it, but it'll say Saratoga Chips. There's a picture of it in Chicago at the Haymarket in that, and a bunch of other things. And so it's sort of like people really love seeing that. They really enjoy that, and they enjoy seeing the various cars. And it's just so cool because I'm able to relate everything to the potato chip. If you really look at it, I find, that there were some songs that were written about potato chips, and people like to see how, the various logos, and also how people dressed during the day.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I have a picture from a college in Oregon, and people were all dressed to the hilt, and they're sitting around in a picnic eating potato chips. And when you blow up the picture and turn it upside down, you can see on the box, it says Saratoga Chips.
Oh, wow.
When winter strikes, stay running and stay ready with House. Diesel Treat prevents gelling, but if your fuel freezes because it's untreated, Diesel Lifeline works fast to reliquefy and de-ice. House, prevention and rescue for your diesel.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
I'm curious about this because you've obviously put a lot of thought into this, and the potato chip has evolved and changed and improved in a lot of ways over, the past, 100+ years. What's the future of the potato chip? Do you foresee any changes?
Well, there's a lot of changes going on now because, GLP drugs, and people are, some people are not as hungry and not craving that stuff anymore. There's a big health thing. Anything that goes on, AI, people are trying to find ways to reduce the waste that comes out of the potato chips, make them healthier, different flavors, even the packaging, it needs to be sustainable. So, you can just, and I put all this stuff in the chip news section of my website, and I share that. So, I'll tell you another interesting story, because every time I acquire something, there's a story behind it.
Yeah.
So there was this company called Williams Potato Chips, and they were out of Portland and up in the Pacific Northwest, and they had a package where they would wrap the chips in like cellophane and then put them inside a box. And there was a woman who was an attorney in London, and she told me that her company was in a different industry, was being sued for patent infringement, and that she could prove, if she could prove that this type of packaging that I described existed before 1970, that she would win the thing. So I sent her, I had like 4 boxes, so I sent her, and they're from 1944. And the chips originally were in there. I wouldn't eat them because I'm sure they'd probably kill you.
Yeah, please don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so she ended up winning her lawsuit because of that.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
One of the things you'd mentioned earlier about, logos and whatnot, I know you had said earlier when we were talking about people contacting you from all over the world, and I'd seen one of the blogs that you did message me about the little trucks that the gentleman paints. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, he contacted me. He has a hobby. He makes model trucks, and of 2 different types of industries. One was milk trucks, and the other one was potato chip delivery trucks. And then he wants them to be as authentic as possible. So he gets these models that are, completely blank, and then he contacted me to try to figure out if I had the original logos for these companies. And I'm able to get him a lot of stuff, and then he uses it, and he basically, makes a model of them. And I sent you, he's done a whole bunch of them.
That's cool.
And it's just his hobby.
Yeah.
And another guy who was very interesting was the person who was an engineer for Boeing. He lived out in Seattle. His first name was also Alan, and he had a wild sense of humor. But he bought an old Dickies potato chip truck, and it was really in bad shape. But he was restoring it all, so he wanted everything, from Dickies, which was a company that was, I think, based out in New Orleans, but it's hard to find a lot of stuff on them right now. And so I got him what he was looking for, and then a tin came available, and it was, as I said, it's very rare. So I said to him, I'm going to get you a surprise, and I was bidding on it. And then the next thing I know, anonymous bidder is bidding against me, and it ended up being him.
Mm-hmm.
So he paid a lot more than I was going to give it to him as a gift.
Yeah, you should have probably talked to
but
each other before.
he didn't trust that it was going to be me, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned your museum there. Is this something that anybody can kind of come in and check out?
Well, I have a very large storage area, and it's like a mobile museum. So what I do is I arrange, for 2 years in a row, I think it was 2016 and 17, we did the Chip Festival in Saratoga Springs. We had it in the big convention center called the City Center. And we had every company in the U.S. come, even those that didn't market in the Northeast, because we had the dean of the famous Culinary Institute of America was the head judge, and we had all these famous chefs. And I partnered with the Lions Club, by the way. And what they did was they judged these chips in 14 different categories. And everybody wanted to get the marketing rights, for the best chip in the various categories so they could use it for their marketing. So we got all these different companies to come. And so the first year, I said they gave me some space, but I could only put a small portion of my collection. The next year I had a 40 by 40 space, and I got a lot more of my collection in that. And then I've done different places where like the Saratoga County History Center. I had a big exhibit there for a few months, and I'm always, talking to different people. I started talking to the Smithsonian several years ago, but they move at a glacier pace, so I don't know if anything is going to happen in my lifetime.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, places like the Smithsonian probably are interested in what you've got.
Well, what I try to tell them is, I can get them sponsors, and I personally think you can get a lot of people to come in the door for the potato chip that wouldn't necessarily come into, the museum for any other purpose.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure.
It's a loss leader.
Yeah.
Wow, Alan, this has just been absolutely fascinating. I'm curious if you have any final words, thoughts, interesting facts.
Well, I mean, it's amazing to me just how much you can relate everything to the potato chip one way or another. And I'm constantly doing research and finding all the developments that are going on. And I post something every single day on my Facebook page, which again is Toga Chip Guy. But I also have, if you go to togachipguy.com, that's my website, and I have my blog is up there, and just amazing amount of stuff that you can relate to the potato chip. And it's everybody's interested in it. It brings back a lot of nostalgia. And what you also find out is whatever potato chip people grew up eating is the one that they like the most as they get older.
That makes sense.
So there's a lot of flavors, that varied across the country.
The chip unites us.
Yes.
It brings us together. And I think that's
you think
nice
about
thought.
Things like Super Bowls and other types of things where everybody gets together. That's sort of the common food.
Mm-hmm.
And Super Bowl Sunday, by far, is the biggest day for chips, even bigger than like the 4th of July.
That makes me wonder, Alan, is there a dip expert? And can you team up with them to become the chip and dip experts?
Well, I have, like when I said I have this section called Chipsapes, I do talk about chips and dip recipes.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you're the guy.
I don't know.
Yeah, I try to cover every base.
Cover all the bases, for sure.
Yeah, well, Alan, we appreciate it. We appreciate all that you do. We have definitely learned a lot. And we appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure talking and to both of you and meeting you.
Thanks for listening. Today's episode of Trucking with OOIDA was brought to you by a dedicated team of people. That includes Jim Fetzer, Tennille Flick, and Kim Boren.
You can listen to new episodes and extended interviews on your favorite podcast platform and on the OOIDA YouTube page. Please subscribe while you're there. If you've got thoughts, we'd love to hear them. Call us at 1-800-324-6856 and leave a message, or send us an email to podcast@ooida.com, and we might include it on the show.